thanks everybody for your flexibility. Of course, it looks like it's not raining now, but we just wanted to proceed with an abundance of caution and make sure everybody's safe. So thanks for being flexible and shifting online for those of you who are planning to be in person. Thank you for coming to our Institute for Sustainability and Resilience Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific seminar series. ISR, as many of you know, works to coordinate research and curriculum around sustainability and resilience across campus, and we're really excited to be now working with the Biocultural Initiative as part of ISR. And so having the seminar is a key part of that. So very excited to have Ron Vave presenting today. And I've asked Rachel Dax, one of the leaders of the Biocultural Initiative, to introduce Ron. So pass it off to Rachel.
Aloha, my kako. Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for.
Rachel, we can't hear you. Oh no, maybe that's Mike.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now it's good. Sorry, that might have been my computer.
Okay, all good. Well, thank you all for joining. I am excited to introduce Dr. Ron Vave this afternoon. Dr. Vave is an Italke or Indigenous Fijian who worked for the University of the South Pacific in Fiji between 2000 and 2014, where he helped facilitate monitoring trainings and lesson exchanges on natural resource governance with local communities, government officers, and conservation practitioners as part of the locally managed marine area network across 7 countries in the Indo-Pacific region. His scholarship focuses on human dimensions of fisheries, resource management approaches of Indigenous peoples and local communities, with a particular focus on place-based approaches and how they can be applied to overcome the challenges of the Anthropocene. Ron pursues science that embraces multiple ways of knowing and recognizes deep cultural context of resource management with actionable integration of traditional ecological knowledge and values while advancing understanding of theories and frameworks in human ecology, cultural anthropology, and social ecological resilience. So we're very grateful to have Dr. Ron Vave with us today. Thank you so much, Ron, and I will turn it over to you.
Hey, aloha. Thank you for having me. So I'm currently with the Department of Pacific Island Studies, and I'd like to thank the Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific for hosting me today. I see that some people currently on Zoom may have already had this talk before. So I was just privately messaging Kevin. Kevin, come on, man, you've had this talk so many times, you can go away. But this time around, I'm going to try and situate this talk specifically within this biocultural lens. Because one of the things with this talk is that it examines the indigenous aquatic protection as a biocultural practice, where governance, rituals, food systems, and ecology shape and sustain one another. So in Fiji, cultural protected water bodies or culturally protected areas are not just beliefs attached to nature, they're actually governance practices through which kinship, rituals, food provisioning, aquatic stewardship are inseparable. And that's the biocultural core of this work. I'll walk you through what these culturally protected water body practices are, how widespread they remain, what ecological and social functions they serve, and why contemporary conservation is both an ally and a threat to their presence. Well, it's not wanting to move. Okay, so before diving into Fiji specifically, and this is just as Rachel has briefly touched on, a sense of the geographic professional context that I come from. I've been very fortunate to work across the Indo-Pacific region with the Indo-Pacific Locally Managed Marine Area Network from Philippines, Indonesia, through to the Melanesia, Polynesian, Micronesia region. And one of the things that this experience has taught me, and what is central to a biocultural perspective, is that marine resource management in the Pacific is never purely ecological. It is always embedded in kinship, in ceremony, in governance, and identity. So the LMMA network, or the locally managed marine area network, tried to honor that. And my own research has deepened this understanding, even in me, myself as an Indigenous person who I thought I knew about the environment, by focusing on practices that are fundamentally cultural in origin, but produce measurable ecological outcomes. So in case you don't know where Fiji is, it's to the east of Australia. Fiji is comprised of about 14 provinces that you can see in these different colored regions. There's over 300 islands. So I want to ground this talk in place because biocultural research demands that we start from place. So my father's village is in Sawana, on the island of Vanombalavo in Laos, which is that area on the right. And my mom's village is up north, Tiliva village in Bua province. Both are coastal communities whose identities, governance, and food systems are woven into their relationships with the sea and the rivers. And this, this isn't just background. It's part of the methodology. As an Itoke or Indigenous Fijian researcher, many of us occupy a position that is both insider and outsider, which shapes the access, the trust, and the responsibilities that we carry in the work that we do. So briefly, this is my mom's village up north, Tiliva, and it's to do with the totem fishing. So that's my maternal grandmother on the lower left. The freshwater fish, the freshwater goby that you see there, is their totem species. It comes up once a year, upriver, lays its eggs, and then it goes back down. And before it comes upriver, there would be a particular plant species, and this is the story that was shared to me by this maternal grandmother of mine. There's a particular plant species in the village that flowers, and that is indicative that the fish is about to come up. So only women of the villages along this riverbank who do not have their menses, they would be the only ones that would get into the water to go and harvest this species. One of the key biocultural points here is that the rule is to only share this catch communally, that it should never, ever be sold. And this is not a conservation regulation, like it's a cultural protocol that regulates access. So only the women who do not have their menses from the villages along this river, that would be the ones that would get into the water. It affects social obligation and even the ecological effect that limiting extraction is a consequence of a cultural, as the rules that are put in place are not its purpose. And this is exactly what biocultural approaches helps us see, that these cultural institutions, villages, clan heads, tribal leaders, these institutions produce these ecological outcomes. But the motivation behind them is social cohesion, reciprocity, and the spiritual obligation. Because when the women from my mom's village who do not have their menses get into the water to go and harvest, so they would get down at the lower end of the picture for downriver. They would all get in quietly, no one would speak. So they have the handheld nets, much like what you see in the picture there. They would then make their way upriver, all the while dipping their net, lifting it up, checking to see if their totem fish is in it. And if they lift it up and they don't see it, they continue quietly. But as soon as the first woman lifts up the net and sees that the totem species is in there, she would then chant. And the chant that she uses is the same chant that my mom's people would use to welcome a human visitor, a relative or friend to the village. But only this time, it's according to their totem species. That's that sacred relationship that exists between people and the environment, particularly with these totem species. So this is exactly what this biocultural approaches helps us see, that these cultural institutions produce ecological outcomes in terms of the harvest. So when they get to the bridge up on top, all the women would take their catch to that area that have marked in pink, which is the village lawn. They would offload all their catch. All that catch is then apportioned into heaps or piles of fish, and then each of those piles goes to every household or villages along this district. That's the sharing component. Regardless of whether women from that particular household or that particular village participated in the fishing event or not. So the motivation behind this practice, social cohesion, looking after each other, but for us, when we flatten these practices into traditional conservation, we lose that cultural mechanism that makes them work. And here's the powerful examples of where conservation law and cultural practices collided. So in 2023, the Fiji Times, which is a newspaper back home, reported that turtles were confiscated from a meeting that was being held where the high chief and other chiefs from the region were in attendance. For these turtles, just to backtrack a bit, whenever the chief wants to eat fish or turtle, we have 7 traditional positions in the Indigenous Fijian system. There's the chief, there's the warriors, there's the priests. That's a traditional position. And one of them is the traditional fisherman, locally known as the Ngwanendao. So whenever the chief wants to eat fish or turtle, he'll basically just tell the traditional fisherman, the Ngwanendao, who would then go and get them. And because they are knowledgeable about the marine environment, about the species, about the seasons, they know when and where to go and get them. So in this case, because the chiefs were having their meeting in the village, what was said is that these turtles basically offered themselves. They came up, they beached themselves, and so people saw that as a sign that the turtles knew that chiefs were in attendance, that there was a big chiefly meeting that's happening, and so they offered themselves as food for the meeting. But the 2 gentlemen that you see here, they are fisheries officers from this region. They basically just worked according to the law. They knew that turtles, there was a moratorium, there should be no harvest or consumption of turtles. If there was any turtle that needed to be harvested or consumed for traditional ceremonies, that it needed an exemption. And there was no exemption for this. Even as Indigenous Fijians and even as fisheries officers, they just followed the letter of the law to the T. They went, got the turtles, and released it. So there was a big conflict. Not altercation that happened, but just a verbal discussion that happened between fisheries officers and communities. So for this biocultural audience, the key takeaway from this is that state conservation frameworks that criminalize culturally sanctioned harvest undermine the very governance systems that have sustained the species and their relationships for centuries. This is not poaching. It's part of ceremony. It's part of that connection with the environment. And that's the biocultural challenges, how to create legal and policy space where both systems coexist. So my background is in the natural sciences, marine biology, coral reef ecology. But one of the things that I've seen is that studying fish or just studying corals, when I go and talk to people, and people would just want to know, hey, the fish, is there enough for us? Can we increase the numbers into the future? Not just for us, but future generations. And really, the things that impacting the management of the resource is us. So resource management is not really, or shouldn't really be about managing the environmental resources themselves, the fish, the invertebrates and whatnot, but it's about managing people. So when I came to that realization, I knew that both the ecological and the social were inseparable. And this is kind of what drew me from the natural sciences into biocultural research. It is also what makes this culturally protected area work significant, because these practices sit at this intersection of ecology, governance, and culture, excuse me. So my central research question is, how does the cultural practice of indigenous Fijian funerals influence social and ecological resilience? I sort of felt like a loner and an outsider because I was doing my PhD in marine biology. And when people asked me what my research question was, or what the focus of my research was, I was mentioning funerals. Automatically, people in their mind would ask funerals of fish, uh, but I told them it's funerals of people. So I even got weird looks from that. But from a biocultural standpoint, social resilience, that capacity for communities to maintain the cultural institutions, ecological resilience is that capacity for aquatic systems to recover. They are both co-produced and supporting and sustaining each other through these practices. And that's the theoretical foundation of this work. But this work wasn't just sort of conceived from the outside. There's two critical gaps that motivated this research. First, Indigenous cultural knowledge, values, and practices around water protection are changing, eroding, and in some cases, sadly, have disappeared entirely. Second, Fiji's Great Council of Chiefs, which is the highest traditional governance body, they themselves requested research and recommendations on funeral practices. And funeral protected areas being one of them was sort of how I tied the pieces together, including the social aspects. So this is not externally imposed research. It's research requested by Indigenous governance institutions themselves, and that matters enormously for the ethics legitimacy of biocultural stewardship. So this slide basically frames three pillars that culturally protected water bodies serve simultaneously. There's the biocultural argument in a nutshell. So biodiversity conservation, protection of whole systems, and sustainable use that discourages exploitation. The middle one is on food security, contributing to subsistence, artisanal, and commercial needs. And then there's the human well-being, cultural services, traditional knowledge, governance systems, and even aesthetics. Even on that aesthetics component, one of the things that my wife loves to do, if she could spend most of her time doing that, she probably would, just go down by the beach, sitting by the beach under a tree, having a book, or even knitting, which I've done, accompanied her several times on. It's just a piece that she gets from the environment. And so seeing things from a purely ecological lens with only the first pillar, a purely social lens might see only the third. The biocultural approach recognizes that all these three are produced together through the same cultural institutions, and that separating them, as most conservation planning sometimes do, actually weakens each other. So I want to quickly touch on the growth of community-based marine protected area work in the Pacific region from 1997 to 2009. In Tuvalu, 10 marine protected community-based marine protected areas were established during that time. Papua New Guinea 79, Solomon Islands 109, and Fiji 217. One of the things that was sort of made us wonder in the locally managed marine area network is why there was this rapid uptake and implementation of community-based MPAs in Fiji as opposed to other places. And I think that's the critical question for this biocultural audience. How many of these incorporate or even acknowledge the existing cultural protected area practices that may exist in these communities? In most cases, sadly, the answer is little to none, except for a few institutions. And that contemporary conservation was layered on top of this and sometimes displaced the indigenous protection systems that had been in place for generations. And this is one of the reasons why, in my mind, community-based MPAs were prolific in Fiji. is because it's always been a part of our practice, been a part of our culture. Whenever someone from our community dies and they're buried on clan land, that some parts of Fiji, their community or their village would protect a portion of the reef or river for 100 nights and oftentimes for a year for chiefs. And then it's open to harvesting later on. That fish catch from that funeral protected area in the reef or river is then used in the memorial feast that brings to an end the mourning period. And for community, they've often reported large catches, even in this short time frame. So this is real place-based, enforceable cultural closures with measurable ecological effects. So for biocultural practice, the funeral protected areas simultaneously serve spiritual obligations to the deceased, social cohesion through communal mourning, food provisioning for the funerary feast that happens, and ecological recovery during that closure period. So that culture creates this protection. The environment responds, and we're able to feed ourselves. And that, sadly, or in a way, a true benefit that because these funerals, they bring together massive amounts of people. The onus is then on the family of the deceased and their community to host and feed everyone that comes. So that's where ritual finances and food are three main concerns for communities. And that's where these cultural protected areas help with supporting this culture, the hosting of people. So the funeral is the governance mechanism that triggers the protected area. So without the cultural institution of the funeral, the ecological protection won't happen. So when funeral practices erode, either due to urbanization, changing religious practices, or even economic pressure, the conservation effect also disappears. So culture, ecology, they both decline together. And so this work on culturally protected water body practices, they're not new. But sadly, despite the fact that they've been documented in Vanuatu by Francis Hickey in 2006, where body of water is protected following the circumcision of a child. In Fiji, similar things is done, protection of a body of water for a person being installed as the chief or for their funeral. But these are usually very perfunctory, just kind of one or two sentences in these journal articles that talk about this cultural protected area practices. Having worked in the region for 14 plus years before I came to do my PhD, I usually hear of these cultural protected areas, but I guess because having been brought up in an urban area, not seeing these place-based practices being done, I was sort of, in my mind was probably putting up a wall whenever I hear these foreign practices. And they serve a greater purpose. So for this chief's funeral in 2008, when they eventually opened the funeral protected area and harvested it, there was about 700 kilograms, 1,500 pounds of fish that they got. So they were able to feed people. So we've seen from the literature some mention of these protected areas, but for Fiji, these were the sort of the key questions that I was asking. What and where what other types of culturally protected water bodies exist? Whereabouts are they still being practiced? To what extent are they still being practiced? Who is it done for? Duration, and a whole bunch of things. Because the key thing here is that one, even amongst indigenous peoples ourselves, we often know of the practices just from our own place, just where my dad's from, just where my mom's from. But we don't know about the other parts of Fiji. So because of that knowledge fragmentation, we don't know about the countrywide picture, so that cultural erosion accelerates. So that fragmentation itself is a biocultural crisis. The loss of knowledge means the loss of a practice, which then leads to both culture and ecological loss as well. So here are the 5 types of culturally protected water body. I'm just going to quickly go through, and you can read it in that paper in 2022. So they spend the full life cycle of an indigenous Fijian. There's culturally protected area practices that are established at even the conception of the first child. The first poop, which is the meconium, another protected area is done. For that meconium one, so basically the expectation, the thing that I've seen in the literature from the 1800s for Fiji, is the expectation is that within 2 days, the first poop needs to come out. If it doesn't come out, usually there's stress or even death of mother and or child. So they would celebrate when the first poop comes out. And if it doesn't come out by day 2, one of the things that's in the literature is that they would use candle nut juice, sort of as a diuretic, to get things out. And hopefully child will be born, both mother and child will survive. So there's that knowledge that's embedded in this practice, and it's care for people, it's care for the next generation that our ancestors were already kind of looking into. So each of this is a biocultural institution in and of themselves, cultural event that produces an ecological closure. The diversity of triggers tells us something profound. The Pacific peoples embedded aquatic protection into every major life transition, from birth, coming of age, leadership, and even death. That each generates a period of ecological recovery, and that's sort of biocultural design at its deepest levels. So we use this 4 survey methods to try and get the data for all across the country, given that it wasn't documented for Fiji. One of the things that I'm thankful for is that in the US, the PhD can be more than 5 years, whereas back in Fiji, Australia, New Zealand, it's usually 3 or 4. So I had the time and I wanted to set a proper baseline, so went out all across the country to try and collect this data. But what this also shows is that this point that biocultural research, you can't just document culturally embedded practices with satellite imagery or remote sensing alone. You need ethnographic engagement, trust, cultural competence. So the methods need to match the knowledge system that we're studying. And so for me, one of the things that I'm always looking ahead about is whenever I'm doing research, that one, it's got to be in service to communities, and 2, that the results, if it's to be in service to communities, has to be palatable and usable by them. So if I were to generate maps on the extent of cultural protected area practices all across Fiji for all 5 that I'd shared with you earlier, it's a lot. So I was trying to make it simple. So what I've done here is for Fiji map, I've drawn the squares around them. Just for example, these first 2 squares on the 2 main islands are the first 2 squares on the top left. So basically what you're seeing here is the extent of practice for the conception protected area all across Fiji, based on community level data that was obtained. So that shows that 92% of the communities, and I use traffic light colors again, it has to be palatable to communities. Everyone's watched movies. Red means never done that. Orange, used to, but no more. Green, obviously, still being practiced. So for this conception protected area, there's only 1 practicing community. And then you can see that there's 12 communities that are in orange that used to do it and have ceased. So, and then there are other communities that can be seen from this that have multiple types of cultural protected areas that they're doing. From a biocultural perspective, the fact that you've got these different types of protections that are done to just 1 or 2 practicing communities each, that are on the verge, basically the top 3 of cessation, complete stop. So from a biocultural perspective, this is similar to language loss. When only 1 or 2 communities still practice it, the knowledge becomes critically endangered. Unlike species extinction, cultural practices can be theoretically revived, but only if they're documented and if the social conditions that sustain them are supported. And this, I think, is where biocultural conservation differs from biodiversity conservation. The intervention is cultural revitalization, not habitat protection. That's sort of a secondary effect that comes through once you've got the traditional systems in place and functioning. So many of these places have ceased. So they affect the fact that they've stopped affects roles, rights, and legitimacy. So the social impacts. The person who has the authority to declare and enforce a culturally protected water body closure is exercising a culturally sanctioned role. So when that role is no longer exercised, the person's social position is diminished. So the community self-governance capacity weakens, and that ecological protection that usually comes as a result of this cultural protected area implementation disappears. So there's this feedback loop that biocultural approaches are uniquely equipped to describe. Cultural authority enables ecological stewardship. When cultural authority, so your clan leaders, your tribe leaders, social cohesion within the community erodes, that stewardship collapses. And the loss of that stewardship further weakens the community's sense of purpose and identity. So this cross-country comparison shows the variation even within Fiji. Some provinces are maintaining just one or two or none at all. And so this patchwork in the protection that's being done shows that these cultural protected area practices are not monolithic. They're locally adapted expressions of broader cultural principles. For conservation practitioners, this means you can't design a one-size-fits-all approach. This biocultural conservation requires province by province, community level engagement specifically to that community that respects local variation while supporting that underlying cultural logic. So this funeral protected area, and this is just specifically looking at the funeral protected area, given that it's the most widely practiced across Fiji, is diverse. As you can see, that it varies all across the country. So different communities implement it differently for different durations. Different species are protected. And this diversity is, in a way, not so much, it's a strength, not a weakness. So it represents centuries of local adaptation to specific ecological social conditions. But it also, one of the things that I find that it made documentation and support more complex. So from a biocultural approach, we must preserve this diversity rather than trying to standardize it into a uniform best practice. It's one of the things that we often try to do. This standardization would strip away this cultural specificity that makes each practice meaningful to its communities. At the end of the day, if there's anything that needs to be respected, it's communities' autonomy to be able to manage the resources, the environment around them, one that they've been managing successfully for generations, the way they see fit. And for other entities, researchers, governments, NGOs, that it's best that we support them in that process. Because for us, outsiders, if there's a decline in fisheries in a particular area, we can always move to another. Whereas for communities of a place, this is where they live for generations to come, their children and their children's children. And for them, it's important to ensure that the place is thriving, to be able to support them, not just in terms of food, but socially, culturally as well. So for the funeral protected areas, this is for my mom's province in blue, and you can see that just that diversity and that variation within a province. So the first bit is for my mom's communities, they're actively practicing funeral protected area. The second one, that it's largely done for anyone that dies. So anyone that passes on, my mom's village communities across their province, they would establish a protected area. I remember in some presentations where I'd give this information, they said, well, if there were lots of deaths, wouldn't you run out of places to protect? In a way, it's possible, but the way that they've done it is the waters that's protected is clan waters. So clan land, got clan waters in front of it, that's the area that's protected. Somebody from another clan downstream passes on, they would protect that portion. So there's multiple protected areas that are simultaneously running. For some communities, they protect the same place. So if you look at that third row, all the ones in green, in gray, protect the same place. 29% of communities around the country protect the same place. So whenever a chief passes on, they always protect the same place. But when it comes to places like where my mom's from, who establish a funeral protected area for anyone that dies, for communities in gray, that third row, when someone passes on, so they're protected an area, and within, it's usually protected for 100 nights, which is around 3 months. Within that 100 nights, if someone else passes on, because they're protecting the same area, they'll then tag that 100 nights for the other person on top of the existing funeral protected area. So now the funeral protected area is longer. So, and it can continue. One of the records from my mom's village that I got, the longest one, I think it's about 3 years, where there was constantly adding on of this funeral protected area. So it's things that we didn't know, even when I was doing conservation work as a researcher back in Fiji, and things that's important for conservation practitioners to know, but also government as well. So that was just about the extent of practice. What I also wanted to know was who actually was it done for? Thankfully, community seeing it was an Indigenous Fijian researcher that was interested in this, and they also wanted to know the information, particularly since it's sort of supported by the Great Council of Chiefs. They were willing to give the names and the years for every person that it was done for. Granted that the people that I interviewed, they know some, so I had to ask others within their community and then layer this on. One of the things that this shows is 3 provinces don't establish funeral protected areas. I asked them and they just said that it's never been a practice for them. Interestingly enough, the fact that they are close, that's something that I've always wondered about. Why? The other thing is, for these 2 provinces, Naita Siri, which is this one here, and Boer province where my mom's from, they established the most funeral protected areas. And part of the reason for that is because they established funeral protected areas for anyone that dies, not just chiefs or high-ranking individuals. And so the biocultural implication of this, where the practice is mostly egalitarian, so applied only to community members regardless of rank, it is more robust. Where it's restricted to just elites, so funeral protected areas that are only established for chiefs, that it's more vulnerable to cessation of the practice because it depends on a smaller number of triggering events passing over chief. A chief could live and reign and be in leadership for 40 years or more. So there would be no practice during that period. Whereas in places where it's done for anyone that dies, it's frequently being done. People see it, people see the benefits of the closure, not just socially, but culturally as well. And so that, I think, is an important insight into biocultural resilience theory. So the thing is, I was also interested in what people protected and what they harvested. So most communities protect everything within the waters, all species, but then they selectively harvest. Yeah, so so they only selectively harvest just fish and invertebrates, meaning they don't touch the demo and everything else. For some of them, it's only food fish only. Some all food fish. In other cases, it's very selective about what food fish they target. And again, just shows the diversity of management, of governance that's in place in all of these communities. So whenever it's time to harvest, when it's time to open, they usually have this high fish catch, even though it's just a short-term closure. And so to them, they see the benefits. So this is significant ecologically because even these short-term closures, around 100 nights, produce measurable increases in fish biomass. I remember when I first came to Hawaii and I was talking to marine biologists about this, and they were thinking, what, 100 nights and you get that rapid increase and larger catches? It was sort of difficult for people to comprehend. But that, I think, is the biocultural feedback. Communities, they see the benefits of this closure firsthand whenever it's time to harvest a funeral protected area, and that visible recovery influences the practice. Communities are accustomed to short-term cultural closures, are more receptive to long-term conservation closures. So when conservation organizations come in, they discuss with communities about declining resources. They suggest the establishment of marine protected areas. Immediately, communities accept it because they've seen the benefits of short-term, small area closures. So just imagine if it's a larger area and for a much longer time. So in that case, culture creates that behavioral precedent for conservation, a finding that should matter to every conservation practitioner, I think, working in the Pacific. And this is just a basic summary of that funeral protected area information that I've just shared with you. So there's this variability all across Fiji in terms of duration, what species is protected, the various enforcement mechanisms. So that, I think, reflects that local ecological knowledge that's embedded in communities, their knowledge of the environment, and it sort of frames or influences structures their cultural protocols. So some communities, they just close it for 100 nights, others for a year. Some protect all species, while others, it's only food fish. That variation is important. It tells us about the local ecology, the social structure, and the specific cultural meetings attached to death and mourning, and how it varies across the communities. One of the things that I was thankful for, unfortunately, a high chief passed on in 2016. The brother emailed me to come and do my research because he had known about my research and I worked with him in the past. And so this is the food security pillar that was shown earlier, making it tangible. So the fish catch from the funeral protected area actually offsets funeral food costs. And you can see the sequence here. Traditional and spiritual protocols, first one, then the communal harvest, and then everybody shares and uses that in the memorial feast that brings to an end the mourning period. One of the key things here, and this is something that was interesting, fascinating to me, because it's rarely the case. This lady in the picture 2, the one on the lower left corner in picture 2. So she is the leader of the harvest, of the traditional fishing clan. And she's basically the one that instructs people where to put the net, where to harvest from, what species to harvest. And that's something that's embedded in her lineage, generations, and now on her. It's usually, from what I've seen in most parts of Fiji, is that it's usually male. So in this case, every step that you see here is governed by cultural authority. It's not just like conservation regulation, but there's the ecological outcome. The productive, sustainable timed harvest is exactly what formal conservation aims to achieve. But the difference is that the cultural system does it out of respect for culture and social obligations, spiritual protocols, but not through enforcement and fines. historically, it's so much time. Sorry, we'll wrap up soon. Historically, only the cultural protected area practices exist. Right? In the past, communities in Fiji would only establish the funeral protected area, for example. Small areas, part of their bigger fishing ground, they're usually closed for short term, 3 months, 100 nights to a year. So only the cultural protected area practices existed. There was no separate conservation area. So the cultural constitution was the conservation mechanism. And this is pre-contact because what I've seen is that it was documented back in the 1800s. So culture ecology were governed just by one system. Now, what's happened is that with declining fish stocks, increasing numbers, conservation areas are established because we're interested in connectivity, we're interested in connecting systems from mangrove, seagrass, reefs. So you're protecting this large swath of area. But what this shows is the gray areas that are there is the places that are available to people to fish from. Having these multiple systems, protection systems in place, effectively reduces the amount of area that's available to people to fish from. So this becomes a displacement problem because for communities, they have to go further away from the village to areas where there's better fish for them to harvest from. But as you can see with the gray line that's kind of marked there, in Fiji, we still have customary marine tenure systems. So that gray line is sort of roughly indicating a fishing ground that belongs to a community. We have management rights, and we can just discuss today that the fisheries is declining. By tomorrow, we can establish a marine protected area. Everybody has to follow and adhere to it. We don't have to consult everybody. We don't have to consult nearby communities, although we do. We don't have to get approval from government. Kind of what's done here. So when I first came to Hawaii and I heard of this long CBSFA process, I really felt sad. I went back to Fiji and I was telling my colleagues, former colleagues, and friends and communities how really lucky, more so blessed we were in Fiji to still have customary marine tenure in which we can still make decisions and implement things without having to get approval and support from others. But with these two competing systems in place, you're wanting to protect areas, you're wanting to ensure that people are fed. What happens then is that some communities, based on the information that they shared with me, they stopped their cultural protected area practice. That's a tragic outcome. These communities ceased their practice, but now, funerals are still happening. When it comes time to have that memorial feast, they no longer are implementing the funeral protected area. Where do you think they're going to harvest from? That larger conservation area. Remember, the organizations, conservation organizations that helped implement these conservation areas, they don't live here. They live far away. So communities end up not telling them that they're harvesting the conservation area in order to stay and maintain this cultural practice of feeding people at the funerary feast that brings to an end the mourning period. So not only is that cultural practice of funeral protected area displaced, but also it's displaced the traditional institutions that sort of put these protected areas in place. So that cultural institution, because it's been displaced by conservation, communities adapt by treating the conservation area as the de facto bank. Whenever it's a funeral, mourning feast, they go and harvest it. So they end up as paper parks. From conservation organizations' perspective, they're reporting to donors and others saying, oh, we're working with local communities. We are helping them sustain themselves through fisheries management, and they're getting all of this fish. But in actual fact, on the ground, in reality, these places are sort of open paper parks in a way. Granted, this is not all of them, but some of them. And this is precisely sort of the unintended consequence that has a biocultural lens. If it had a biocultural lens, would have predicted and prevented. If conservation planners had understood that communities already had these functional closures, they could have built on those systems rather than replacing them. So this map broadly is just focused on the extent to which funeral protected areas established. In green are where it's actively practiced. Yellow is where it's done sometimes, and sometimes it's not. Orange is where it used to, but no more, and have ceased. And I think that is where we should really be concerned, because in terms of biocultural diversity, these communities where this cultural ecological link, like this practice, they've ceased to practice, that cultural ecological link has been sort of severed in a way. What does this mean? So I was interested in where do this funeral protected area practices are done, which is the ones in green. They have ceased is the ones in orange. And how does it overlap with where conservation organizations are working? So that's where WWF works. And again, this is roughly, they are working in more places. Wildlife Conservation Society works there, and then you've got Conservation International. Just by looking at the map and the overlay, you will see that in places where these conservation organizations are working, you've got actively practicing FPA, funeral protected area communities in green, including the ones in orange. Same thing with WCS and same thing with WWF. I looked at management plans that I could get a hold of from the three conservation organizations. The only one that explicitly incorporated funeral protected area into the ecosystem-based management plans was Wildlife Conservation Society. In the conservation plans that's done by WWF and Conservation International, there was no mention of funeral protected areas, despite the fact that it's actively being done in places where they work. So one of the other things that I was looking at, why is this happening? These conservation organizations are based in Fiji. They're big international NGOs. They employ indigenous Fijians like myself. When I was working with them through the university, the sad thing that came to mind was Trojan horse. For these conservation organizations, part of the ways in which some operate is they would get people from the area. So I'm from the Lao province. This is where my dad's from. So I was working in this province where Conservation International works now. My mom's from up here in the north, from Bua, so I was also working there. Because these communities knew my family, knew my elders, they easily accepted me. Oh, he's gone to university, he studied about the environment, and surely whatever he's bringing is going to be helpful for us. But many of us have migrated from our places. So even though my dad's from here, my mom's from here, I was born and raised in the capital city, university, Western education. So all I knew are stuff that I've learned from books and whatnot. Granted, we all do go to our places. Oftentimes, we rarely get to be there when these cultural protected area practices are happening. So in that way, we're sort of cushioned from what's happening. We don't know about this place-based funerary protected area practices, as an example. Because when they ask us about resource management, the first thing that comes to mind is biodiversity conservation, establishment of protected area, as opposed to listening and hearing about the cultural protected area practices that they have. When they say that to us, foreign, it just goes through one ear and out the other. It doesn't go into the conservation plans. One of the ladies at a conference that I was in last year in Fiji mentioned this as part of her presentation. We learned the tools of the colonizers and we continued the colonization. Having migrated to the urban areas, even within country, even as indigenous Fijians, being Western educated, learning of these modern conservation approaches for biodiversity conservation and whatnot. That was what we knew. That was what we took. That was what we implemented, much to the demise of some of our communities because it was displacing that cultural institution and practice that were there. And that, I think, is perhaps the most important cultural message for this audience. Contemporary conservation in the Pacific, however well-intentioned, can function as a form of governance displacement when it fails to recognize and integrate existing cultural protection systems. I've studied now and I've gotten this information for Fiji. We don't know much about the Pacific. One of the things that I'm thankful for with the new fisheries program here at UH is I have an incoming PhD student from the Solomon Islands, and it's a practice in their village, the funeral protected area. So I'm hoping that he'll be accepted soon so he can do this research. But really, the concern is that 30 by 30 target, protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030, being pursued across the Pacific without documenting or accounting for cultural protected area practices. We don't know if it's practiced or to what extent it's still being practiced, or to what extent, sadly, if it's already being lost across the Pacific. If 30 by 30 proceeds without this documentation, we risk displacing these indigenous protection systems that already exist. That, I think, is a research urgency. One of the things that I'm hoping is to get more Pacific Island students into the fisheries program, even if they're not here, but based in other institutions across the world. But students from these home countries doing research back in their places because they are culturally attuned in terms of protocols and rituals and things that need to be done and things that should not be done, for them to collect this data themselves and contribute to the information. That biocultural approaches, this traditional protected area system, should not be like an afterthought for conservation planning. So to summarize, these place-based practices only done in our clan waters all across the country in various parts of the Pacific. Some of it is undocumented. It's place-based and it's affected by migration. You know, many of our elders, generations before us, have moved for better access to healthcare, education, and whatnot. But at the same time, it's sort of disconnected and severed us in a way from these practices that's done back home. Second is this lack of awareness. Even us Indigenous Fijians that are members of these conservation organizations, we are sort of don't know about these practices. Most of us are ecologists in a way. And so when something of that nature from the social sciences comes to us, it's our brain just smoke comes out of it slowly and we fade. The third one is that contemporary conservation displaces the cultural protected area practices that's done, sadly, because it has a lot of funding support for them to be able to go out to many communities and preach about conservation and diversity and engage communities, but don't have that transdisciplinary approach that's really critical for this biocultural work to successfully happen. For some of these practices, they're only done for chiefs. And so when those titles are vacant, there's no one holding a chiefly position, those practices are not done. So it stops as well. And then there's just an increased population and demand for resources that just adds to this problem. For some of these cultural protected areas, they're very sacred. And the fact that some of us are now slowly losing sight of the fact that it's sacred, that it's part of who we are, for our identity. So we just go in and post these places. The last thing, and this is, it was difficult for me coming to Hawaii, to the US, outside of Fiji to do this research, because I was wondering who is going to be supervising me in this work and how will they influence. But I'm thankful for the team that's here, very diverse from ethnobotany, NREM, oceanography, social science, biology, and economics, Kim Burnett. Like this biocultural work cannot happen if we're just looking in silos at each only in its own field or discipline, that it really needs us to be working together. So thank you for your time. 1 hour on the dot. I apologize for having taken too long, but here's the references, and I'm happy to be. I hang around for a few more minutes if people have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. That was a wonderful talk. If folks want to put their videos on so it feels a little more like we're all together, that would be great. And if anyone has any questions for Ron, maybe you can just unmute. But first, maybe we can give Ron a round of applause, on mute or not. So great to hear about your work, Ron.
Thank you.
So Ron, would you mind stop sharing,
Yep,
and then we
yep.
can actually see folks who want to ask questions. And if people want to just raise hands, I don't see any questions in the chat. Oh, I do see from Kevin Chang, but maybe Kevin, you can just ask your question.
I am trying to find the floating panel, which has disappeared somewhere, so now I don't know how to stop this thing.
Oh,
Does anyone know how I can stop it? Oh, here it is, finally. Yeah,
oh, great.
sorry about that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, Kevin, you have a, ch- a question in the chat. I can ask it, or if you want to unmute.
I think Kevin's on a call, so you should ask it
Oh,
later.
got it. Okay. Okay, it says, Mahalo, Ron. This is always helpful for thinking and framing things for me. I would be interested in the orange and whether you think traditions were displaced and replaced by something more quote unquote Western or central, or are they more akin to a Wild West of resource management? Mahalo. Oh, he says, I have a call right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's several things. One, those cultural protected area practices are part of culture and tradition, have been in some places eroding on their own. Even for some of our peoples, we're disinterested in our practices. We've disconnected and moved on. But ideally, some of us are kind of, now that it's documented, people were surprised by the fact that these practices exist. Even when I was sharing with conservation organizations for the staff, they were thankful. Finally, it's documented. Now we know, now we can incorporate it. But sadly, as highlighted by Kevin, the erosion is exacerbated by conservation organizations not knowing, not integrating it. And again, because we are sort of primarily focused in our own fields, not doing the transdisciplinary approaches of it's done, we're just not doing it well. Fiji is usually seen as sort of one of the leaders in community conservation and networking. But yeah, again, we also have problems. When I shared these findings back to conservation organizations in Fiji, I thought that people were going to be happy, but that was not the case. There were some that were upset because they were saying, hey, we've been working with local communities. We're the locally managed marine area network. We work with communities. And yet what you're showing with your results is that we may have contributed to the erosion of these practices because we work in places where you're saying that this thing works in. We didn't even hear of it. I don't know whether that was a desensitization when they were there, but again, I was part of this. I was part of the problem. I'm thankful that I came and did this research, and now I'm sort of on the other side, trying to ensure that this is incorporated, not just for the betterment of the community, the indigenous populations with regards to resource management, but also that social human dimension that we've always been missing.
Viveka?
All right. Thanks, Ron. Great talk as always. So I'm still not quite sure if I am understanding the logistics of the funerary closures. Is it before, during, or after the times when they need to feed a lot of people? Or is it just
Both.
physically separate completely so they're protecting one area while they're harvesting a lot from another?
Great question. So both,
Okay.
when the person has just passed on, everybody gathers for the funeral. So people then and there, because often death occurs, not planned. We scramble for resources to try and make sure that everybody is hosted, that we feed them well. But then the funerary feast that's done towards the end, separate event, but that's kind of, we know it's going to happen at 100 nights. We know that this funeral protected area is going to be in place for 100 nights. We're all going to gather on this particular date on that 100th night. Then we'll go and harvest, and that catch used for the memorial feast.
Okay, so the 100-day closure is in preparation for the feast, or it's
Uh,
completely
I
separate from the feast?
I wouldn't say it's in preparation for the feast. It's just for them. The way that I've been told by communities when collecting this information, the funeral protected area, it's sort of just a sacrifice that people make
Hmm.
for the passing of a loved one to protect the resource, and they're willing to give it up for that loved one that's passed on. The fact that the catch at the end of it is used in a memorial feast that brings to an end the mourning period, that's sort of secondary, because even now, when they have some of these funeral protected areas, the catch is quite low. But the thing for them is we're going through these motions of what we've always done as part of our, for the loved one that has passed on. That's part of our culture and tradition.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Is it ever separate, physically separate from the place, or is it always the funerary closure and the place where they harvest from to feed all of the people coming? Is it always in the same space, or are those sometimes different?
Same.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and before they would, particularly for chiefs, the largest funerary protected area that I've seen documented was 690 something square kilometers, quite huge. But now, and that was for high chiefs back then. Now, I guess because of high populations, there's more people, stakeholders that are in use of the resources to be mindful, the places have become smaller. And again, that's oftentimes that the decision is made by the communities and they adapt it as they see fit. Because there was a cousin of mine who passed on in my island. I was staying in Fiji for the field work, so I went for his funeral as a relative, but also did my research. And for him as chief, usually they would protect it for a year, but everybody was there from all across the country, and they figured, you know what, in 3 days they're going to be going back. And while they do protect only a small portion of the reef, because they were going to harvest it for everybody that's come, they decided to protect all the waters all across the island, which affects 21 communities. But all the 21 communities were in agreement that all 21 communities protected their fishing grounds for that 3 days. The harvest was just from a small area where it's normally protected, and the catch is again used in the fish. But like I said, it's like going through the social, cultural, traditional protocols of process, but they can adapt it now as they see fit. Because not everyone, as they said during that funeral, is going to be coming back for the 100-day memorial feast. So they figured we are all here, we'll adapt the practice so everybody can participate in the feast. For the mourning period, usually 100 nights or a year, during that period, people will refrain from alcohol or smoking. They would give up something. And that's sort of the new way, but in the past, like these protected areas that are done in the waters.
Jillian, I see your hand up.
Hi, thanks so much for the super fascinating talk. I was wondering about if there's ways that people feel that like a broader global loss in ocean fish is impacting their ability to carry out these protected area practices. Um,
I guess
or oh, I'm
that
sorry, there's one more piece. And so the other piece was or so do people feel like maybe even more that there's a need for these protected areas, or are there circumstances where people feel like it's inhibiting too much the ability to, meet needs for eating? And then related to that, you I thought it was really interesting the image where the map where you showed us there was like this smaller area that was used for the funeral protection area. So I just wanted to hear about if there's any ways that people are sort of shifting this practice a little bit. So say, for example, are there things like making the area slightly smaller or making it bigger to sort of adjust to what perceived needs are between protection and being able to meet dietary needs and cultural needs.
Oh,
Thank
good
you.
question. Yes, I missed your talk, so I'm definitely happy that we are able to connect. With regards to the third point about, it's small already. For them to reduce it even further would probably, I don't know, defeat the purpose. But then again, these communities are adapting, in places where this funeral protected area practice has ceased. For some of them, it's not easy to say that we'll completely stop this practice because there's just not enough of a fishing ground to feed everybody. We have much higher populations we have now than in the past. And so they are adapting. Places that have ceased completely, one of the things that people have always asked me is, do they want to think about revitalization? Are there plans to revitalize these practices in places where it used to be done but has ceased? For me, I'm of the view that that decision is completely up to the community. If they want to revitalize it, then they will. But the key thing from our end as researchers working with communities, conservation practitioners, is just providing them the information, particularly with the entities like conservation organizations, government that work with these communities to know about the place better before trying to implement new systems that could make things worse. I mean, at the forefront, people just see, oh, there's increases in fish, but they don't know that the cessation of some of these practices, as mentioned in one of the slides, it affects the roles, the access, the rights that people have to those places. So that's a big crucial loss. So from this biocultural perspective, that's key to ensure that these things are always strongly intertwined and should not be considered separately. For your first question with regards to declining fishes globally and how it may be impacting this, I think, and I cannot say this for communities, just my own view is that that would probably be important to communities if conservation or the higher fish catch at the end was the goal, but that's not. It's more the practice, the governance system where it's decided today that we're going to protect these resources. Everybody needs to be on board. Everybody just gets on because they know that come a time one of our family members will pass on. Ideally, if an area is protected, we wouldn't want others to be poaching it. And just kind of respect the person that has passed on and wait till when it's opened. Sorry, I hope you had three questions. I answered all of them. And my email is somewhere that can be passed around. Happy to field any questions, definitely after.
Go ahead, Ketty.
Is there time for another question?
The seminar goes till 2:30. Ron, I don't know if you need to take off or if you have time.
Let's go. I do have a meeting at 2:30, so I'm gonna try and hop off
Okay.
at 2:20 at the
There's,
latest.
I think one more in person and then there's a question online from Anne.
Great. So thank you so much, Ron. That was a really, really interesting talk. And I'm a big fan of your work now, so I'll have to follow you. Um, I wanted to ask, you talked about how the conservation areas, the governance documents have not really taken into account the funerary practices and protected areas. And I'm wondering if you have plans to make policy recommendations about how they might go about incorporating more thought about that in, and is there any future in which the two could either coexist or somehow complement each other better?
No, great question. I've actually been, so I finished this study back in 2021. The preliminary findings was first shared with the Fiji Locally Managed Marine Area Network back in 2019. And like I mentioned before, they were not happy with it for some of them. So that was really the route that I was trying to influence resource management and policy, was first starting again with communities, giving information back, then with partner organizations that work with them to incorporate it into conservation planning. Sadly, even up until now, WWF and CI haven't taken it on board. I have no idea what the issue is, and I really don't want to push them. They're doing great work with communities. And I've worked with conservation organizations. So the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs has conservation officers around all 14 provinces in Fiji. Each province has their own conservation officer. I've tried going that route, sharing the findings with them, but their work is sort of largely supported by conservation organizations. So at the end, they still lean more toward what the conservation organizations' priorities are, especially in terms of the number of marine protected areas that has to be reported back. There's a lot of hype now, especially given the 30 by 30, where people are constantly reporting about the number of MPAs that have been established. Rarely have I seen any documentation to date about the inclusion of culturally protected areas in that, despite the fact that it's been documented since 2019 up until now. And that's kind of, being in the Department of Pacific Island Studies and in fisheries, I'm sort of blessed with this opportunity to really sort of engage the region, particularly given the fact that we're very similar, have interrelated practices, that it could be happening elsewhere. And maybe this thing needs to happen elsewhere for Fiji to finally realize, oh, we are missing this. We need to fix what we haven't in order to make things better. For this locally managed marine area network too, the whole this is about their work is adaptive management. One of the things that we pride ourselves on with regards to adaptive management, we get new information, we try things. If it doesn't work, we review it, revise it, re-implement, but often in consultation with communities. I just don't know why this cultural protected area stuff isn't gaining traction with communities. So I know this thing's going to be that it's recorded and it'll be on YouTube. So conservation organizations in Fiji, oh, there goes Ron again, sharing about what we are not doing well. Yeah, it's kind of put me in hot waters with conservation organizations back home. Oh, Anne is mentioning that it also happens in Kenya. Similar thing. Kaya forests. I've heard of sacred areas too on land, India and other places. Amy, thank you. All new, many questions. Definitely happy to sit with you all later, whoever is time, and discuss.
Yeah, Ron, I was just wondering, sorry if I know time is running out. Have you explored protecting these areas under UNESCO and this community having those conversations? Are you thinking of that? If you can just talk a little bit about that.
I cannot speak for the communities, but I know that one of the ways that we thought that the place that this would gain traction is with OECMs, the other effective conservation measures. Sadly, the OECM people in Fiji, which is part of the IUCN in Fiji, they're kind of saying it's not part of OECM because it's harvested at some point. So I don't know. I don't know if it'll ever make it up to UNESCO, but Kevin has been very supportive in the sharing of this work with Indigenous peoples and other places. Uh, yeah, there's still a lot of work that can be done, needs to be done.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron, and thank you everyone for coming out to this seminar. And Ron will eagerly be awaiting your emails with more questions and thoughts for collaboration. So mahalo, everyone. And please join us for our last seminar of the semester, which will be with
Kavika?
Dr. Kavika Winter on April 22nd in person. And Ron, we hope you come in person too, and we can all say hello to you too.
Hey.
Okay, thanks
Okay,
everyone.
thank you.
Mahalo, Mary. Thank you for hosting.
So